Hi, good evening, Galleon. This is Mayor Tom O'Leary. It's good to be back. Unlike some weeks when I'm all revved up with two or three topics that I really am anxious to share with viewers, tonight I really don't have a jam-packed agenda, if you will. Would want to talk a little bit about a meeting I had today, and what I hope is furthering of the bike path, multi-use trail, whatever term works for you. But um, as you think about if you use that bike path, I've bumped into a lot of folks who have said, "Oh, well, where are we going to go next? What direction do we go next?" So, to that end, we're working at a leg that would go at the south end of the existing trail, and aim west towards Biddle Road. So we've had some preliminary conversations with the property owner out there, and so one thing that we're looking at for 2021 is an extension to the west. The other one is really the point of my conversation today, or actually meeting with Galleon Superintendent, which was from my point of view, it's someone that I guess I'm just getting to know, and so it was a enjoyable and valuable conversation. What we talked mostly about is once you get north of Bucyrus Road on Hesby Drive, some of you will think in your mind's eye, on the west side there's no sidewalk, but it is graded, if you'll notice the next time you're out there, so that a bike path multi-use trail could be put in without much additional earthwork. So we talked a little bit about once you got north on that bike trail, where you would go next. And the discussion is about what if the school is interested in, and then if they are, how they would like to see us cut around or through the existing property. So I think it was a good first discussion about how we can use this upcoming round of freeze funds. We've already making application for some larger state grants that might allow us to pole vault or leapfrog forward on the project. But we're really building it one segment at a time, so it was a good first step to get an idea of how the school envisions moving forward. And it gave us an opportunity to talk a little bit about how the school envisions freeze funds fitting into their recreation. Well, it's really not park and recreation, but it's certainly recreation planning on into the future. So I described that as a good meeting, and each of us has found a way to couple, it's probably not the right verb, work with, combine with, collaborate with, some or all of those, with the area food bank. And I think the school has really started ahead of the city's participation in sponsoring some of those drive-through food pantries. Hundreds of people line up hours ahead of the events, so it lets you know that people really are in need. What the city's done, and this goes back to something we talked a little bit about at the end of last year, is put as much money as we feel like we had of the CARES Act funds, the coronavirus funds, into funding food banks throughout this year. I believe that those people who are struggling, suffering as a result of the virus and the turn down in the economy, that really hasn't changed for many people. So we're going to continue to work with the school district, with the Second Harvest Food Bank, and try to provide that little bit of help to the family. So all of those reasons, it was good to meet with Superintendent Allerding, and hopefully it's real important, I believe, that in a community like ours, that you have to have your schools and your local government working closely together. And so the kind of meeting that we had this morning is a good first step in that direction. So with that, we have any questions?
Not at this time.
It's really kind of odd how these things run hot and cold. I would say after the last couple of weeks, to have a little bit of a breather on the heated discussion that I think centers around free center, no free center, how to build it, how to fund it, all those items. I think in some respects, I think we got kind of close to each other under the basket, to use a basketball analogy. And so I think what we'll see with regard to that over the next few weeks is council finishing up the survey. To remind people, it doesn't take long, it's pretty straightforward. I think it'll provide both in your answers and any comments that are offered some direction for folks to on city council to help them make up their mind, help them ask the right questions of the proponents, and hopefully avoid this project that a lot of folks have worked a lot of years on, months on, weeks, however, whenever y'all bought in, there's been a lot of work put in. I'd like to see it reasoned through to some sort of successful completion rather than kind of where it stalled out 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I'll stop with that. Maybe there's a good cooling off period. I think the other thing I would say, if there aren't any questions, is city council looks to be a relatively quiet agenda. There are 4 or 5 items on the agenda for a first reading tomorrow. I guess if I had to anticipate, I would think that most of those will go through on a first reading, but I wouldn't want to forecast that meeting as uneventful or in any way unimportant. So that's kind of that's really how it looks like from City Hall. Those people who work around me or know me know I tend to worry a little too much. I'm already beginning to worry to make, that looks like our revenues are a little bit lean this time of the year, this year, but we're really not at a point where we need to push a panic button or ring any kind of any sort of alarm about that. But we'll keep real close track of that. As I had mentioned a couple of other times in these Monday night conversations or broadcasts, that we're taking a very slow and careful approach to replacing employees as they are retiring. And so we're going to continue to work through that. There's absolutely no reason to have any sort of layoffs at this point, but what we're hoping to do is be able to get some people moved around in their positions and their classifications to allow us to absorb some of these retirements without having anybody moved into a position that doesn't work well for them, or that they're, when they came to work for the city, they had certain things in mind, and now they're asked to be doing something completely different. So I think we'll have a couple, 3 weeks we'll be working through that. But really the primary goal is not to replace retired positions until they're needed, and try to work with the existing staff. Certainly at least through the first several months of this year, to see what our revenue picture will be like before we replace some of those people that that had worked here for quite a long time. So anyways, I'll stop there. I promise I could go on for more, but if there's some questions, maybe that would make things go a little better. Anything tonight?
Yes, we do have a couple questions.
If there isn't, hey, just make one up, Matt. Talk about how you're underpaid and overworked or something silly like that.
No, not at all.
All
right. Julie has the first question tonight. She said, there are a lot of old buildings in this town that look like crap, like the old car wash off of Charles Street. Mm-hmm. We need to clean the town up. There are a lot of people with extra time right now willing to help out.
I was with you all the way till the end, Julie. I'm not sure about that last part, and without sounding like a gray-haired old guy, I would say real concerned about liability that might, if a pickup truck full of people showed up to volunteer to take care of somebody's private property, I know that could go wrong. The idea of having people clean up public property, I think you're gonna hit the nervous Nelly, the I'm worried about liability issue. Every time this comes up, every few months, this comes up, this issue of and often it's commercial properties that people identify as the eyesore property. Then other times you hear about particular residential properties in neighborhoods or along certain streets. Without picking a fight, we do the best. Let me back up a little bit. I think we don't do the best that some people think. I don't think we tear down as many properties as many people would hope or want, but a little bit of appreciation of the time it takes to have a property that is vacant and becoming dilapidated, and being able to foreclose on that property for taxes or for just condemnation. There are a few more steps involved in that. I think with the county land bank, we have a little bit of a tool to chip away at some of the residential properties. Excuse me, a little coarse tonight. On the commercial properties, the county's land bank is just getting into identifying a source of funds and begin to look at doing something with some of the commercial properties. In both the residential and the commercial side of the land bank, however, they're looking for a end use that they have confidence in. And so I think that sometimes becomes an issue. I don't know what to say, Julie. There is a small, I'll emphasize, appropriation in this year's budget that is there to do some demolitions, and so we're going to begin as the weather warms up. We're going to identify some properties that will have partial funding through the land bank that I referenced a minute ago, and couple that with some local funds and begin to tackle some of those commercial buildings. The one that you mentioned is not one of the ones that's on this year's radar, but without picking on it, that's one that people frequently talk about. Just say one more thing, see if there's another question. I suspect that almost all of these eyesore properties are for sale. And so probably the best way for the city or anyone else to acquire them, if they see them as eyesores or not productive, is to acquire them and demolish them. And seems like increasingly that role is understood as the government's role. And so we could probably have a good debate over that. But it was just a few years ago, less than a handful of years ago, that we were on a life preserver of fiscal emergency. So our ability to take city resources and really put them in a major commercial demolition efforts, probably, I don't see it for a few more years before anything like that would there be enough money to really get into it in a big way. So Julie, if you're sitting at home thinking, man, that's the longest, worst answer I've heard in weeks, that might be the first thing you and I agree on. It's not a particularly good answer, not enough money, and the property owners of these junk properties probably have a different point of view about how, let's say, junky they are. So there's a summary of the mush that I went on with for a few minutes. Sorry about that, Julie.
Okay, and then I want to point out Tom
Yeah.
actually has a follow-up question to this topic. Why doesn't the zoning inspector and the city lean on the property owners to either clean or maintain or bring up properties to code?
It's interesting, it's a good question. Coincidentally, there were some investors, turned out to be, well, it doesn't even matter that they were young, but they were relatively young real estate investor types, and they were really targeting some of those properties. So it was, we had a conversation over the weekend, they called again today. I think the short version of that story is that we were able to give them a relatively long list of properties, existing properties that are condemned. Why aren't they taken over and demolished? Well, they're probably current on taxes and oftentimes don't owe a mortgage, but they're dilapidated. And the government, as well as many private people, don't have the money to buy them. So that's kind of how they sit in limbo. What was interesting about these potential investors is that they knew they were kind of, their niche was to buy some of these dilapidated properties in smaller communities in this area and turn them around, rent them when they can, or that it's almost a dirty word these days, flip them and put them back in the single family use. So there is a list, several dozen properties that have been condemned, and we'd make those available to anybody who wanted to look at acquiring them. However, most of them are condemned. The owner has limited resources to turn them around, so that's kind of how they end up in limbo. So I'm not sure if how well that answers Tom's question. And invariably this happens where this is one of my least favorite topics, and some critic would say, yeah, I could tell, I've driven around this town. It's really not something that I get much any joy. It's with a sense of drudgery that going and condemning and wrestling away from people properties, particularly when the city doesn't have sufficient resources to do right by that property to begin with. So they're good questions. It's something the community needs to tackle. We put a little money into it this year, see how we do with some of the properties that the land bank will be dishing our way, and see if we can't get them cleaned up. So
Okay.
another question, anything but that.
Yep, Curtis had a question on a different topic. We're going to
Yeah,
go back to the
why,
Free
sure.
Center.
Okay.
He wants to know how would having the Free Center help downtown businesses?
I am not the best person to speak to that, but if the commercial travel sports side of the project clicks or booms, then that's the way it would have a crossover to uptown. Once upon a time, this goes back 7 or 8 years before we had any hotel. And one of the companies that we talked with and when the community was doing the feasibility study was a company that did uptown hotels, kind of more, I don't want to say center city because that's not really our uptown, but they looked for properties that weren't out on the commercial strip. Didn't turn out that they were the company that was most interested. But if that were the case, if there was another lodging close to uptown, I think there would be a good tie-in between those. But it's a good question to ask people who see that commercial side of why we should build the Free Center is real compelling. I'm probably not the best spokesman on that. For me, Curtis, we should build this thing in order to provide a different level, if you will, of recreational opportunity for both intramural and adult sports, organized sports, but also for youth sports. So if you saw me on my stump campaigning for the Free Center, I'd be talking about all the benefits for the immediate area, the youth in the immediate area, and what that could do for the community. And I see this commercial side, which is an important issue for a lot of the proponents, as being secondary and not, I don't want to say secondary. I see that as add-on. The reason we build this is for our young people today and in the future. And if some of the upside benefits happen, then there again the uptown area would benefit in terms of fans, family, teams coming up to to have meals and participate that way. Again, it's youth sports, so any sort of entertainment in the spirits district's probably not what this group might be more interested in. So one of the things we'd have to do going forward is the idea that Travis and Stacy have up at Planet 14, where there's plenty of stuff for adolescents and kids to do, and also works pretty well for adults. So that kind of family entertainment venue. Now I'm really talking about stuff. I'm making the words up, but I think in that way it could benefit. But why you want to build the Free Center, why folks want to get on board with that, is so that young people throughout this part of Ohio, mostly I'm focused on Galion area residents, but I think that's the main reason. Anything that happens is probably, is great. I hate even that term, gravy or icing on the cake. I think that would reach our highest expectations. We'd all be pretty excited about that. But the facility can be successful if people can talk proudly about it. It can be a source of recruiting for local businesses that have particularly talented people they want to recruit for key jobs. All of those things, Avita, all the way through to our manufacturing, it may help us there. I think those are probably surer bets, safer bets, if you will, of its success, or measures of its success, than whether or not we have a real measurable year one uptown business grew by this much, year two this much. I think those happen once the facility's up and established and is successful in most people's eyes. So, all right, I see this light up here saying you're over answering the frigging question, so I'll stop at that point.
Okay, thanks, Mayor. Next question tonight came from Tina. She asked, why aren't we getting the streets uptown plowed, especially along the curbs and the street crossings?
Oh, crap. I thought we were doing a pretty good job. What I would say about that, outside of today, since we began to get those accumulation of snow, we've really had sub-zero temperatures. And so, gosh, it seems like it was last Friday where we had a little bit of break in the snow, and we were caught up on the streets and getting them out of the driving lanes. And the group spent all day, I believe it was Friday, because you kind of darned if you do, darned if you don't. Once we began to make good headway up there, you get the busiest part from a commercial point of view. So they worked around that, and then maybe you exaggerate as you get older, but I think we had 4 or 5 more inches. So some of the headway that was made in the square and in the immediate uptown area was kind of undermined when we got another few inches of snow. what I would say, where Tina's coming from and where it's true is we don't put people out in the middle of the morning, meaning not middle of the morning, but 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning doing that snow removal. And we are getting it once the driving lanes around town, once the main streets are plowed. So, like I said at the beginning, I thought we were doing a pretty good job. I think as the weather warms up, that'll be real important. You can see in a related issue that where there's some storm water, where there's some clogged catch basins, you're beginning to see as it thaws, you're getting that buildup of ice and water and debris in those catch basins. So if it does stay warm for a few days, they'll be back uptown trying to get what you pointed out cleared up, and then also hitting on a sort of worst case scenario where you begin to see that ponding or the storm water drain for whatever reason is full of ice or full of some sort of debris. So you can expect that crew to be working on those two items. So we have attended to it. I thought it was a little better than last year, but it seems to me, at least from my perspective, this has been as snowy, maybe not as cold, but as snowy a spell as we've had, since maybe the second week in January. So we're working on it. I joked the last couple of weeks about our strategy on that is April. We just let it warm up and then that stuff melts away. That was not terribly funny, but I think it is, it's an ongoing battle to keep the parking areas, particularly up at the square and those crosswalks that she identified, as free of ice and snow as everybody would like. So.
Okay. Next question tonight came from Mike. He asked, why does the city let trains stop on tracks and block road crossings?
See, that's like, what were they talking about before? I said I don't even like the topic. Tom asked the question. It was an okay question. Doesn't matter now. Mike, this is a topic I really like. And I think part of it, the shortest answer, three pieces to it. The shortest answer is the reason they stop here is because where Galion is on the Continental Railroad system. Doesn't matter much to us here in town, but this is a very busy intersection, if you will, sort of a blending point for a couple of CSX's fairly significant lines. If you were in a helicopter, you had a drone footage, you'd see that between here in Shelby, while we have 2 lanes going through Crestline, two lanes, you'll see as you get up north there it narrows to 1 lane. And so what we see, and then south of town, I think a lot of people remember when they took out the second track on the way to Marion. Okay, those 2 bottlenecks on the railroad lead to a situation where a hypersensitive critic would say they can't get out of their own way. And there's a little bit of truth to that. So if you need, for instance, those grade crossings between those 2 points just south of Shelby and not really too far west of Galion is when it drops to single lane, but if you needed to get across that area, you would think they were doing it on purpose. They really don't have the capacity, and so what they're doing is mixing that traffic and then what used to be a big issue. Mike asked, so I'm going to get into it a little bit. The track that goes south of town, Pershing that way, ends up in Mount Gilead on its way to Columbus. Things used to be worse because that line was much more significantly used. Now it is the amount of coal that goes to the lake from the mines in southern Ohio and other places south of here, really down quite a bit. So it doesn't seem that way, but that's that's allowed for less congestion on the railroad. Okay, all of that having been said, there's really only one way to improve that, and we talk about it, gosh, man, it seems like once every month or 6 weeks. Mike must have gotten stopped and was late getting someplace, or he's just sick and tired of it. But in order to provide the kind of roadway flexibility, really some set of someones in city government, in the community, working with state representatives, et cetera, need to envision and then go about getting an overpass built at 61, 309. I think those are the two state routes called Portland Way South. That is probably the best way that you get some sort of flexibility. Okay. One more thing on this. The railroads will tell you, tell anybody that they have the right of way. And that almost without exception, the railroad was there first. And while that doesn't give them permission, if you will, they don't have permission technically, to use their right of way the way they want to. As it boils down as a practical matter, they have the right of way over the roads, and it's the highway's responsibility to build themselves out of the railroad's way or wait. So how's that? 5 minutes to upset Mike, but the short of it is, if we want to get around the fact that Galion is a railroad town, has been since it grew up, probably the best way to do that so that we don't have that kind of small town congestion that I believe is genuine, is to begin to do a little research, begin to think about, and then just make decisions about whether that railroad overpass would be the transportation priority, because it's a big enough project that it's something that you would have to work on for 5, 6, 7, 8 years to put together the funding, the engineering, and candidly the political support. But who knows? I think we will see more infrastructure built over the next decade or the next 7 or 8 years than any of us, even us older folks, have seen. It's always a case of whether they're going to build the right infrastructure, the correct infrastructure. But I wouldn't rule it out, Mike, that if the railroads continue blocking, that we could build the political support, and then the financial construction plan to build something like that. So, long answer. I don't know if he's got a follow-up or not, but.
Not directly. There was some kind of some back and forth with a couple other people regarding the city's ability to fine the railroad for blocking crossings.
I don't know. Everybody knows. If you used to be, everybody knew a bunch of railroad nuts, and they were all experts. They're almost like baseball card collectors, not to insult railroad buffs, but they knew all this and they knew all that. So for the most part, most people don't give a lot about it. But what I would say is the most recent legal cases tend to prove whatever the argument on the back and forth was. You really don't have much authority. And CSX in this part of Ohio won the most recent case. So this goes back 3 or 4 years, maybe a few more years ago than that. We noticed, maybe we were just sensitive to it, but if you noticed it as well, you probably weren't stir crazy or just plumb crazy. Once they won that case, it was kind of like, sorry about your luck, we got a railroad to run. So the ability to work with them at the dispatcher office, or even if you knew some of the, if you'll accept the term, right people at CSX or NS as well, but you might be able to have some influence. Now it's really at a point where they're operating their railroad, they're trying to maximize their efficiency, and they'll give you permission to build over top of them or underneath of them, but that may be their best level of cooperation that you could find. So there's other things I could say about it, and there may be some, if that became a top transportation priority, there may be some things that we could do to build a partnership with the railroads, but I think that, all of a sudden I'm going to look like I'm levitating. I'm making so little sense. But speaking of levitating and railroads, though, there is some talk out there, and getting a few emails, there is some talk about passenger rail again. So as to anticipate the question, if Galion is going to be represented in truly higher speed rail, that would be above 79 miles an hour. We got a lot of work to do. One of the things I saw about the proposed schedule, I don't know a whole hell of a lot about it, but enough to be worrisome, is that they're firming up a stop in Dayton. So anytime that you slow down between Columbus and Cincinnati, it makes it less likely that you really should have a stop from Cleveland to Columbus. So what we'll find, even though the people in north central Ohio will say Galleon's a natural, et cetera, our ability in this community, this region, to demonstrate that people will ride the train will have a lot to do with whether we get plugged into a planning schedule. And quite honestly, if you get left off the planning schedule, when it gets down to minutes and hours on the timetable and thousands of dollars of infrastructure to meet that timetable, you really have to think through and execute a pretty solid game. So my biggest concern as representative from Galion is that we would present Galion in a way that made it easy to have a stop here, but we're mindful of the fact that the more times you want to stop between, let's say, Delaware and Cincinnati, every time they stop, it makes it a little less, a little more steeper for Galion to climb to be able to stay on that timetable, stay on that schedule. So if you want to fight over passenger rail and then fight for 4 or 5 years and then nothing happens, come on along. I did that once before, back in the early 2000s, and so I've been on that. I think it'd be really neat, and everything they say about passenger rail is, I'm a thumbs up supporter. But there's some realities of working with the railroads and trying to figure out how to actually make it happen. That willpower in Washington and support from a lifelong Amtrak writer like our current president, and translating that into a stop in Galion, there's a lot of moving parts between those two realities. And I think you'll see, probably not out of the DeWine administration, but you'll begin to see support in Columbus. And so if you want to be part of All Aboard Ohio, now's the time to dust off your engineer's cap and your support for passenger rail. This is as good a window of opportunity as maybe we've had since Obama was first elected. And you remember Governor Kasich at the time turned down $1 billion. Getting a little off the topic. Would they ask? Oh, trains blocking crossings. Here I am talking about that, about passenger rail. But the thing I'd say quickly on Kasich, because it sounds like I'm just taking a cheap shot. I mean, there was $1 billion offered Ohio. The problem was in that offer is the billion may have gotten you into a couple more billion before you could really get a train up and running at a satisfactory speed on a schedule that allowed people to get to and from where they wanted to go, on a one-day basis. It just, many people want to leisurely drive and do business travel to from Cleveland to Columbus, let's say, several dozen, maybe 100 a day. But what they don't want to do is stay down there all night. And so, there's a lot about frequency of trains and a handful of other key issues. But I'm a little bit excited, Matt, to be talking about it again, and seeing if now in a world where the railroads have lost a lot of traffic, probably a third of their traffic due to turn down in hauling materials, either through pipelines with natural gas and oil or with the traditional coal, they may be more interested in finding a place on the track than they had been 8, 10, 15 years ago when I enjoyed working on it every day. So, oh well, enough down memory lane. Anything else? Or did I manage to lose absolutely everyone who was listening?
We do have a couple other
All right,
topics here. Next one came from Bobby. If the ballpark at East Park is not going to be used, can it be torn down? It was always nice when they did softball there, but not getting a lot of use and not taken care of.
Yes and no. I think what that field shows you is that how quickly, meaning in a year or two's time, you can go from having the field fixed up and ready to go for play, and then have it set dormant, and then it does look like it's not maintained. I think the yes part of that is that as we talk with the various youth softball, youth baseball, and those groups are for sure. I mean, they're having sign-ups. All that's moving forward now, and then some prospective adults that were interested in doing some easing, I think, back into the adult softball, perhaps even a co-ed arrangement. It became increasingly clear that we needed to do something at East Park. So. Oh my gosh, I guess it's the first Wednesday. No, that's not right. In an upcoming meeting of the Parks Committee, we will be running for the first time, we as in the mayor's office, running in front of council what we think would be a good set of freeze projects for 2021. And one of those is really the rebuild of East Park into a softball/baseball field. So, I don't want to tear it out. What happened, there really aren't enough diamonds for all of the in-house little leagues and junior leagues coming up, and for the number of kids who are playing some sort of more competitive travel sports. So we tried to get those two groups to fit together. It's not a matter of working together, and there just weren't enough fields. And the trade-off would have been to sacrifice one of the softball diamonds at Pico that the girls' youth program have worked really hard to keep alive during some really lean years. And so this gets into how the infield's cut and stuff, but it just wasn't going to work to have a baseball and softball field on one of what the mayor, what do I know, what I thought was kind of an extra diamond at Pico. I was like, nah, man, you don't know what you're talking about. So when we spent some time talking to those people who practice on them and use them and need them to be flexible for their use, it became pretty clear we had to get East Park back up and running. So I think you'll see our goal would be to have a brand new backstop, which will make the neighbors happier. It'll probably make incoming into the splash park, out of the field, a little less frequent of an issue, and it will be just part of what we hope to see turn around East Park this year, maybe for some late summer, early fall, competitive sort of tournament type play. But who asked that question?
Bobby?
Bobby? I hope that gives you an answer, and the goal is to add more. There was talk a week ago about that being possibly a dog park. Yeah, I'm not crazy about that. There's some other places that I think we can brainstorm and come up with a more suitable place for people to take their canines. So, all right, you said there was another question.
Yes, this one actually also came from Bobby. Different topic. The flooding behind properties on the east side of Pounder Avenue need addressed in the spring. She said 1 yard was corrected, but a lot of yards are still experiencing flooding, and just seems like the city's not doing anything about it.
Yeah, it's I'll get this a little bit off, Bobby, but when a certain group of neighbors want to have an alley closed, and they want to vacate an alley, and they want to make changes for whatever reason, a lot of times because the alley wasn't maintained well. Sometimes what happens is once the alley is closed, it closes also any stormwater outlet that is out there. I think when she was mentioned that they did a little bit of something, but it's kind of back, that's probably what we're talking about. The city's main contribution to that is that parking lot that sheets water down this alley, what used to be an alley. It's not as apparent, and I could have this off, but I think this is what we're talking about. And there's no doubt about it, that water runs north, east of Pounder, down what used to be an alley, and it's kind of a mess. Trying to think of what we could possibly do. I don't know what's below the ground real well sitting here, but we are discussing about resurfacing, not totally rebuilding that parking lot, but resurfacing it. And when we're out there working on that, one of the things we might want to do is intercept the water, let's call it the city's water, coming off of East Park, sheeting off of that parking lot. The old timers among us remember when that was a gravel lot. It soaked up more of that than it did, and the alley was still there. So, we'll take a look at that. We may be able to put in a series of catch basins along there, catch the water before it goes across Walnut, goes across parking lot, Walnut, down Pounder, into right where she's talking about. So, well, I'm really glad you brought that up, Bobby. But no, we'll take a look at that, because it's not funny when you have standing water. There are a lot of lower spots. And some other night we'll talk about how the topography, when everything else is away, tends to drop from 3rd Avenue back into that area where you're talking about. There's really kind of a basin, of which that area that you're describing is kind of a natural basin there. So I won't get into it much more than that, but we'll look at whether we can't drop some catch basins and some tile to get that water, intercept it before it heads north across Walnut, down that alley. It may make sense to catch it coming off the parking lot. Give us a chance. I'll take a look at that. I hadn't heard about that since the last time someone complained, and we fixed it okay for a couple of years, or maybe crappy for a couple of years, but why we do that. And it is true. People use this to surface individual problems all the time, and then they lead to bigger issues. And so I thank her for that. She got another one?
No, that was all I had tonight.
I thought she would have an easy one to have me finish up on. But I'm aware of it, and if we're doing work out there in that in immediate vicinity, maybe then we can get about tackling it. I know we don't, I don't think we retained an easement when that alley was vacated, but somebody that I know, right, Matt, will go back into into our into our archives, if you will, and see if we can't find out more about. And if I'm full of baloney on there was never an alley that was vacated, I'll wear real pink makeup and I'll come on with an embarrassed pink face here in a week or two and try to straighten that out. So, all right, that's what we got.
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm going to wind up by saying this. There remain some important decisions that need to be made by council with reference to the Freeze Center, with reference to the infrastructure needed to support it, and candidly working to try to refine an operating plan that the community at large, not just the people in elected officials or other leadership positions, feel comfortable with, but that most people in town feel like, hey, there may be a little bit of a risk, but it's a prudent risk, and most of the contingencies have been covered. The end of this week is the sort of deadline, if you will, for getting in those surveys. Not scolding, I've done that before in this. But it's real important that if you haven't taken a few minutes and filled that out, you fill it out. As is often the case in these kinds of surveys, there's a rush of several hundred, 500-ish, that come in real fast. And then there's this trickle. If I had to guess, we're probably under 700. I hope I'm wrong, but we sent out close to 7,000. So there's a bunch of those. I don't think any of us that are involved or anybody that's wants to see things happen in this town finds anything more frustrating than to not hear back from people until after a decision is made, and then everybody has an opportunity to second guess. Now, heck, that's the human nature, but let's try to keep that part of human nature at check a little bit. And if you do have some opinions about the Freeze Center, I think the council members who put together that survey, I think it will serve the purpose. They're not professional pollsters, but in terms of getting information that council can make decisions regarding, I think if you respond, we'll get enough info, and the community will end up with the kind of decision that we can all live with. So, with that lecture, you got till the end of the week. Send it in, mail it in. I don't think it's postmarked by a certain date or it's kicked out. But I know council would like to get them all compiled, do a little bit of review, analysis, if you will, and then be able to talk responsively and intelligently, with a more complete understanding of the citizens' opinions about this project. I know myself, it's been 5 or 6 years. I bet it's longer than that, but I don't want to check. That we've been working towards this. I don't want to quit too soon, and I don't want to rush to any kind of rash decision. So get us some info, get us your feedback from that. I know council will appreciate that, and then we can get along the road of deciding what kind of Freeze Center the community wants, can afford, and can make successful over the next generation or two. So, hey, with that, I don't get paid by the minute, and I don't mean to bore people, so I do appreciate the time, and there's some good questions tonight. I'll go home and have to polish up, so I do appreciate the questions, and we'll get back to Bobby and some of the others that had questions that deserve answers. So with that, I'll say be safe, and if you are near a catch basin and you got a little bit of time, and you got something that you can chop that ice up, it'd certainly be appreciated, probably by no one more than yourself, but we really won't be able to get to all the catch basins, so help out a good city worker and help us get back to normal here sooner. With that, thanks a lot. We'll see you next week. Good night.